Hello, good evening. How are you? Well, today we are going to learn something different. We are going to be able to create sentences indicating modality. Therefore, we are going to study modal verbs. If we have this sentence, for instance, here, can, it's a modal verb. The characteristics of modal verbs are the following ones. Modal verbs are always followed by an infinitive, always. Modal verbs don't change according to the subject. For example, if we have here, instead of she, they, the modal verb is the same. It doesn't change. In negative sentence, modal verbs use only a negative word, can, not. And the contracted form should be can't, okay? This is the negative, affirmative, and interrogative sentence. In interrogative sentence, we only change the order. Modal, subject, and verb, okay? These are the main characteristics of modal verbs. Modal verb doesn't agree with the subject. Modal verb is followed by infinitive. Negative sentence consists of adding not to the modal verb. And interrogative sentence consists of changing the order between the subject and the modal verb. Well, now we are going to study in detail the meaning of the sentence and the modality of this sentence according to the modal verb we are using, okay? But first, you are going to focus your attention on the characteristics of modal verbs. Okay, first we are going to study those modal verbs that express obligation. These are must and have to. Have to. For example, the obligation of must is an external obligation, while the obligation of have to is an internal one. If we have this sentence, you must drive on the left. Here, it's an obligation imposed by a law, something you should always do. With have to, it should be, for example, you go to the dentist and the dentist tells you, you have to wash your teeth. In this case, have to is an obligation, but it is not so strong as the obligation imposed by must. The difference between must and have to is that have to is always followed by to plus infinitive, and the negative form, in the negative form, we need the auxiliary. Don't have to, while in must, we say mustn't. Mustn't means that it isn't necessary, okay? Those, the most important ones to express obligation, are must and have to. Ability, it's another type of modality. Ability is indicated by can, could, and be able to. Can usually refers to the present. Could refers to the past. And be able to other tenses, for example, future. If I say an example should be, she can swim. It means that she is able to swim. She learned to swim and now she can swim in the sea. If we say she could, it means that we refer to the past. And if we say she will be able to, it means that we refer to the future. It's like Spanish, sabía nadar, sabe nadar, sabrá nadar, okay? It refers to ability. Therefore, here we are going to focus on obligation and ability, okay? Now, we are going to study permission, how we ask for permission. When we want to ask for permission, we use modal verbs like can, could, may, or might, for instance. Can is a common colloquial situation. For example, can I go out, Mom? It's a colloquial situation in a familiar context. May, could, and might are more polite. For example, may I come in? May I come in? Or might or could. Or for example, could I go to the toilet? In all these cases, you ask for permission, permission to do something. These are other modal verbs, may and might, that are used in these situations and in order to convey this meaning. May should be the past, the present equivalent, and might the past, but might is used when we want to be more polite, without paying attention to tense, okay? Other modalities should be indicated by willingness. Willingness refers to the intention of the speaker. For example, I'll do it. It's the contracted form, will. I'll do it. You have the intention of doing it, okay? This is and willingness indicates that you are intending, you want to do something or to take part into something, okay? Or there should be, for example, with good, my parents wouldn't give me the money. In this case, it's a negative willingness. They are not going to give up this money. Therefore, in this case, we have studied modal verbs conveying permission and conveying willingness, the intention of the author of the action, okay? Right? Well, modal verbs can also express possibility. Possibility may be indicated by several modal verbs. For example, can, could, may, might, must, for example. With must, for example, the baby is crying, and we say, he must be hungry. Perhaps the baby is hungry. We can say also, he may or he might. The difference between may and might indicate less possibility. Less possibility if we say might be hungry than if we say may be hungry. Several modal verbs can indicate possibility, depending on the context. Okay, now another one use of modal verbs should be, for example, with lack of necessity, when you don't need to do something. With needn't and don't have to. This is lack of necessity. In this case, it's not necessary you do something. For example, you needn't open the door, or you don't have to open the door. It's the same sentence. You needn't open the door. It isn't necessary, and you don't have means that not open the door, okay? Don't do that. The difference between both is that in the first case, needn't means it isn't necessary, while in the second case, it means that you don't have to do that. Don't do it. It doesn't matter if it is necessary or not, okay? Therefore, this is another way of indicating a modality in a sentence, indicating possibility and indicating lack of necessity. Now we can express also recommendation with modal verbs. Recommendation, suggestion. For example, with must, with should, and with other modal verb that is ought to. Okay? All of them are followed by infinitive. For example, should be you should do it, but you didn't do it. The person that is speaking is angry because you didn't do what you should do. Or Mary ought to arrive. Ought to indicates suggestion or recommendation. She should do something, but she didn't. Therefore, we have these two verbs, these two modal verbs that are used to make sentence in order to indicate suggestions or indicate recommendations to do something in a specific moment, okay? And finally, we can also express request. For example, request. In this case, we use again can, could, will, and would. For example, can, could, will, and would. A suitable example in order to express a request could be, for example, can you call me later? Later. It's a request. Could you call me later? We say both sentences, can or could. Both sentences are correct in order to make a request. Another request could be, for example, with will or will. Will you cook for me? We can say will, and we can also say would. This request means, like in Spanish, for example, this one with will or with would, it's a stronger request and means Spanish, porfa, porfa. Will you cook for me? ¿Cocinarías para mí? Okay. ¿O harías la comida por mí? Okay? This is this kind of petition or request. Okay? Therefore, these are the other types of modalities indicated in sentences, recommendations or suggestions, and requests. With all this information, we can be aware that the same modal verb can indicate different meaning depending on the sentence. So, for example, can indicate ability, can indicate permission, can indicate request, and the same happens with must. Must can indicate obligation, can indicate possibility, or depending on the type of sentence we can find, okay? But the characteristics of modal verbs is that all of them are followed by an infinitive. An infinitive in most cases without to, and the modal verb remains unchanged depending on the subject, okay? The subject doesn't affect the modal verb, okay? It doesn't matter if the subject is singular or if the subject is plural. The modal verb remains always the same: must, should, ought to, can, could, will, and would, okay? Well, we have finished more or less briefly with the characteristics of modal verbs. We can say, in order to summarize, that modal verbs are easily. We only have to learn them according to the sentence in which we can find them. The modality is something very important in English, in all English sentences, and the structure of modal verbs and modal sentences are quite easy. We should always remember that the modal verb remains always unchanged and that the modal verb is always followed by infinitive. We don't add any s or es to the verb. We only use a negative word to negate the modal verb and a subject operator inversion in order to make questions, right? Well, I hope you could understand it, and if you have any problems, we can review in other lessons. Okay, see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.